Dr. Yana Solis pressed her back against the weathered boulder, feeling the rough granite bite through her field jacket. The morning mist clung to the valley floor below, where ancient pine trees stood like silent sentinels around the den site. She had chosen this observation point carefully, close enough to see, far enough to respect the invisible boundary that meant life or death in this wilderness. 30 meters away, the massive shadow stirred. Kairos, as she had named the male, emerged from the cave entrance with fluid grace that belied his 800-pound frame. His coat shimmered black-silver in the dawn light, muscle rippling beneath fur as thick as a bear's. The distinctive ridge of bone plates along his spine caught the first rays of sun, each one sharp enough to slice through steel. His amber eyes swept the perimeter with predatory intelligence before settling on Yana's position. She held perfectly still, barely breathing. 3 years of this routine had taught her that sudden movements meant death. Kairos studied her for a long moment, his massive head tilted in what might have been curiosity or calculation. Then his mate, Luna, appeared beside him, smaller but somehow more menacing, her silver-white coat marked with scars from territorial battles. Together, they were apex predators that had never known fear. Until now. Until the cubs. Yana watched as 2 small forms tumbled out of the den, their oversized paws tangling in the grass. The cubs were perhaps 6 months old, their bone plates still soft, and their coats a mottled brown-grey that would darken with age. They possessed all the playful clumsiness of youth, wrestling and nipping at each other with tiny growls that would one day shake mountains. The parents' entire demeanor changed. Kairos positioned himself between the cubs and Yana's location, while Luna circled behind the young ones, herding them away from the cave mouth. Every movement was calculated, protective, fierce with parental love. Yana understood that she was witnessing something sacred. These creatures, feared across 3 star systems for their ferocity, became something entirely different in the presence of their offspring. They became vulnerable. They became afraid. She reached slowly into her pack and withdrew a sealed container of synthesized protein, the same offering she had brought every morning for 3 years. Setting it on the ground, she backed away to her usual spot and waited. The routine never varied. She would sit in silence for exactly 4 hours, then leave without looking back. Today, however, something changed. As Kairos approached the container with his usual caution, one of the cubs broke free from Luna's watchful guidance. The little one bounded toward its father, stumbling over its own feet in excitement. It reached the protein container just as Kairos did, and together they investigated Yana's daily gift. For the first time in 3 years, Kairos didn't immediately retreat with the food. Instead, he allowed his cub to sniff the container, to learn its scent. His amber gaze lifted to meet Yana's eyes across the distance, and in that moment she felt the weight of a decision being made. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist to reveal the full majesty of the valley. Ancient trees stretched toward a sky the color of deep sapphires, while a crystal stream wound between moss-covered rocks. This was nature at its most pristine, a place where trust was not given lightly and respect was the only currency that mattered. Yana remained motionless against her boulder, understanding that she stood at a crossroads. 3 years of patient observation had led to this moment, a test she hadn't known she was taking. The cubs represented everything fragile and precious in this harsh world, and their parents would die before allowing harm to come to them. As the family settled into their morning routine, Yana began to hum softly, a melody her grandmother had sung to her as a child. The sound carried across the valley, mixing with the whisper of wind through pine needles and the gentle babble of the stream. She watched as Kairos's ears swiveled toward the sound, his massive head turning to study her with something that might have been curiosity rather than suspicion. The cubs, emboldened by their father's calm demeanor, ventured farther from the den. They chased butterflies and pounced on shadows, their joyful play a stark contrast to their parents' watchful vigilance. Yana felt her heart swell with unexpected emotion. In all her years studying xenobiology, she had never witnessed anything quite like this, the universal language of family, love, and protection that transcended species barriers. Dr. Marcus Chen adjusted his telescope for the third time, frustration evident in the sharp movements of his hands. From his position on the elevated platform 2 kilometers away, he could barely make out the shapes moving near the den site. His voice crackled through the comm unit with barely contained irritation. "Solis, your data collection is compromised. By emotional attachment, we need quantifiable metrics, not whatever this is you're doing down there." Yana touched her earpiece gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "The metrics will come, Marcus. But first, we need to understand their social structure. You can't quantify trust with a spectrometer." Through her binoculars, she watched Luna teaching the cubs to hunt. The female had brought a small prey animal, something resembling a cross between a rabbit and a lizard, and was demonstrating the proper killing technique. The cubs watched with rapt attention, their young minds absorbing lessons that would keep them alive in this unforgiving wilderness. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the team's behavioral psychologist, crouched beside a cluster of equipment 40 meters behind Yana's position. Her weathered face bore the lines of someone who had spent decades studying the intersection of intelligence and instinct. She spoke quietly into her recorder, documenting every nuance of the interaction. Day 1095 of observation. Subject designation: Luna demonstrates advanced teaching behavior with offspring, notable absence of typical territorial aggression toward human observer. Hypothesis: repeated non-threatening contact has established baseline trust parameters. Yana had not chosen her teammates lightly. Chen, despite his impatience, possessed an analytical mind capable of seeing patterns others missed. Vasquez understood the delicate psychology of interspecies contact better than anyone in the field. Together, they formed a trinity of scientific disciplines focused on a single question: how do apex predators learn to trust? The answer, Yana was beginning to understand, lay not in grand gestures, but in the accumulation of small consistencies. Every morning for 3 years, she had occupied the same position. She brought the same offering. She hummed the same melody. She respected the same boundaries. In a world where survival depended on predictability, she had become a constant. Luna finished her demonstration and settled onto a rocky outcrop to groom herself. The cubs, still too young for actual hunting, tumbled around their mother's massive paws. One of them, the bolder of the two, kept glancing toward Yana's position. Its amber eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, as if it were trying to solve a puzzle that had been placed before it. "The young one is curious," Vasquez observed through the comm. "Classic exploratory behavior, but tempered by parental boundaries. The parents are allowing this curiosity to develop, rather than suppressing it entirely." Chen's voice carried a note of grudging interest. "The behavioral modification is remarkable. In every other documented case, these creatures kill first and investigate never. Yet here they are, essentially babysitting in the presence of a potential predator." "We're not predators to them anymore," Yana whispered, watching as Kairos returned from his morning patrol. The massive male approached his family with the satisfied air of someone who had secured his territory. He nuzzled each cub briefly before settling beside Luna, his amber gaze automatically finding Yana's position. The ritual of acknowledgement had evolved gradually. In the beginning, Kairos had simply noted her presence before dismissing her as irrelevant. Then came the period of active observation. long minutes of mutual staring that felt like negotiations conducted in a language neither species fully understood. Now, their morning greeting carried the weight of familiarity, like neighbors acknowledging each other across a fence. A weather alert chimed through Vasquez's equipment, drawing her attention to the atmospheric readings. Storm systems were building in the northern ranges, bringing with them the potential for flash floods and landslides. The valley, beautiful as it was, sat in a natural drainage basin that could become a death trap under the right conditions. Yana, we might need to consider evacuation protocols if this system intensifies, Vasquez warned, her eyes on the swirling patterns displayed on her meteorological scanner. But Yana was focused on something else entirely. Luna had risen from her grooming and moved to the highest point of the rocky outcrop. Her head was raised, nostrils flaring as she tested the air. The cubs, sensing their mother's tension, huddled closer to Kairos. Something had changed in the valley's rhythm, something the creatures could sense, but the humans were only beginning to understand. The peaceful morning was about to become a test of everything they had built together. Trust, Yana realized, was not something that could be established in calm weather. It was forged in storms, proven in moments when survival hung in the balance. As the first drops of rain began to fall, she made a decision that would change everything. The rain began as gentle drops, pattering against the leaves with deceptive innocence. Within minutes, it had transformed into a torrential downpour that turned the peaceful valley into a chaos of rushing water and sliding earth. Yana pressed herself deeper into the shelter of her boulder, her field equipment wrapped in waterproof covers as she watched the transformation unfold below. The stream that had meandered lazily through the valley floor now roared with the fury of a wounded beast. Brown water, thick with debris from the upper slopes, crashed against the banks and sent spray high into the air. The sound was deafening, a constant rumble that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Through the sheets of rain, Yana could see the family huddled at the mouth of their cave. Kairos stood guard, while Luna pressed the cubs deeper into the safety of the stone shelter. Their den, carved into the hillside over generations, had weathered countless storms. But this was different. This was the kind of deluge that reshaped landscapes and erased the familiar contours of home. Yana, your position is compromised, Chen's voice crackled through the static-filled comm. The entire slope is becoming unstable. You need to evacuate to the research station immediately. She ignored him, her attention focused on something that made her blood run cold. Above the den, perhaps 50 meters up the hillside, a section of earth had begun to bulge outward. Water was collecting behind the natural dam of roots and stone, creating pressure that would eventually find release. When it did, everything in its path would be swept away. The creatures hadn't noticed yet. Their attention was focused on the immediate threat of the rising stream below, not the more insidious danger building above. Luna's protective instincts were driving her to shield the cubs from the obvious danger, leaving them vulnerable to the one they couldn't see coming. Yana's mind raced through possibilities. She could retreat to safety and hope the family's natural instincts would protect them. She could try to warn them, though they had no shared language for complex concepts like landslides. Or she could take an action that would forever change the delicate balance they had built over 3 years of patient observation. The decision came to her with crystal clarity. She was not just an observer anymore. She was part of this ecosystem, part of this family's daily routine. And sometimes being part of something meant risking everything to protect it. Fighting against the wind and rain, Yana extracted 3 emergency flares from her pack. The chemical lights were designed to burn, even in wet conditions, providing a bright red beacon that could be seen for kilometers. She activated the first one and hurled it toward the unstable section of hillside, marking the danger zone with brilliant crimson light. The effect on the creatures was immediate and startling. Kairos emerged from the cave mouth, his massive form silhouetted against the storm. His amber eyes locked onto the flare, then swept up the hillside to assess the threat Yana had identified. His intelligence, honed by millennia of survival, quickly grasped the situation. Luna appeared beside him, and together they began the urgent process of relocating their family. The cubs, confused and frightened by the sudden activity, mewled plaintively as their parents herded them away from the cave. Kairos led the way, choosing a path that would take them to higher ground, while Luna brought up the rear, ensuring neither cub fell behind. Yana activated her second flare and threw it to mark a safe passage around the danger zone. Then she did something that violated every protocol in the xenobiologist's handbook. She left her observation post and moved toward the fleeing family, not to interfere, not to make contact, but to parallel their journey and continue marking hazards with her precious store of emergency signals. When a section of the path ahead showed signs of instability, she lit another flare. When fallen trees blocked their route, she used her emergency beacon to illuminate an alternative passage. Through the chaos of the storm, she became their distant guardian angel, a figure glimpsed through sheets of rain, who somehow always knew where the next danger lay. The creatures, focused on survival, accepted her presence as part of the new reality the storm had created. "What the hell are you doing down there?" Chen's voice was sharp with alarm. "Yana, respond. Your suit's beacon is moving directly toward the subjects." But Yana was beyond the reach of academic protocols now. She was functioning on pure instinct, guided by the same protective urges that drove Luna to shield her cubs. The boundary between observer and participant had dissolved in the crucible of crisis, revealing something more fundamental: the universal imperative to protect the vulnerable. As the family reached the safety of higher ground, Yana allowed herself to fall back. Her job was done. The creatures were safe, and the delicate trust they had built remained intact. She had not demanded gratitude or recognition, had not tried to force interaction. She had simply done what needed to be done and withdrawn. The landslide came 20 minutes later, exactly where her first flare had warned it would. Tons of earth and stone cascaded down the hillside, obliterating the cave that had been the family's home for generations. The roar was tremendous, echoing off the valley walls like thunder that refused to die. In the sudden silence that followed, Yana found herself looking across the transformed landscape toward the rocky ledge where the family had taken shelter. 4 pairs of amber eyes were looking back at her through the rain, and in that moment, something fundamental had changed between them. Trust, she realized, wasn't just about proving you meant no harm. Sometimes it was about proving you cared enough to risk everything when harm threatened those you had learned to love. The morning after the storm dawned crystal clear, as if the world were apologizing for the violence of the night before. The valley had been transformed. The gentle stream now carved a deeper channel through freshly deposited silt, and where the ancient cave had stood, only a scar of raw earth remained. The familiar landscape of 3 years had been erased in a single night, leaving both human and creature to navigate a changed world. Yana sat in her accustomed place, though the boulder that had been her faithful companion now tilted at an odd angle, shifted by the storm's fury. She had arrived before dawn, driven by a need to know if the family had survived the night in their temporary shelter. The emergency rations in her pack felt inadequate, a gesture too small for what they had all endured together. The first to appear was Kairos, moving with the careful gait of someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. His massive form picked its way down the transformed slope, pausing frequently to test the stability of each step. Behind him came Luna, and then, Yana's heart leapt, the two cubs, apparently unharmed by their night of displacement. But something was different in their approach. Where before they had maintained careful distances, now they moved with a kind of purposeful intent. Kairos led his family not to their usual morning routine, but directly toward the invisible boundary that had separated their worlds for 3 years. Dr. Vasquez's voice whispered through the comm, barely contained excitement, evident in her tone, unprecedented approach behavior. The storm event appears to have triggered a fundamental shift in interspecies dynamics. Yana barely heard her. All her attention was focused on the family as they stopped just 5 meters away, closer than they had ever come before. Kairos sat on his haunches, his amber eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that seemed to peer directly into her soul. Luna settled beside him, and for the first time she didn't position herself to block the cubs from view. Instead, the cubs were allowed to explore this new proximity. The bolder of the two, the one Yana had mentally named Scout for his adventurous nature, crept forward until he was barely an arm's length away. His nostrils flared as he investigated her scent, his young mind processing this close encounter with the strange creature who had shared their storm. "Easy there, little one," Yana whispered, her voice soft as silk. She made no move to reach out, understanding instinctively that this moment belonged to the cub. He would decide how much trust to extend. Scout's investigation was thorough and unhurried. He circled her position at close range, memorizing her scent signature and the sound of her movements. His sister, slightly more cautious, watched from behind their mother's protective bulk. But even she seemed more curious than afraid, her amber eyes bright with intelligence.